Hello, dear students. Today we will do the topic of endocrine system. Endocrine system basically includes a certain set of glands which pour their secretions directly in blood. They produce chemicals called as hormones. These hormones are required to maintain homeostasis in the body. Homeostasis is the state of steady functioning in the body. Steady functioning means the temperatures are normal, whether the external temperature is low or high, your body maintains a constant temperature. When it is too cold, the temperature doesn't fall down. When it is too hot, the temperature doesn't rise up. It remains normal. Your body activities keep going at a normal pace. This is homeostasis. Along with the endocrine system, the other system which does this is the nervous system. Now, the endocrine system basically consists of glands which pour their secretions in blood. That means these glands have no ducts. But there are certain glands which have a duct, yet they produce certain hormones in them. So amongst all these glands, we will only be focusing on the pancreas. The other glands which pour their secretions in blood and also with a duct, they have a different function, but in your entire syllabus, we'll only be covering the pancreas. But before we move to the individual glands, you need to study the difference between hormonal and nervous control. Both of them, I told you, maintain the homeostasis, but the hormonal control is usually slow, whereas the nervous control is immediate or rapid. The hormonal control is transmitted only through blood, whereas the nervous control is transmitted through synapses when the two neurons actually come in close contact, and it is transmitted chemically through a neurotransmitter. The hormonal control affects different organs. Its effect is widespread, whereas the nervous control only affects a particular gland or a muscle. Effect is local. The hormonal control effect is short-term or long-lasting. Like we all grow, the growth is permanent. We do not reverse our growth. But for digestion, after digestion, the extra glucose needs to be changed into glycogen. And thereafter, next day or next meal, the process can be repeated. So the effect is short-term, but the growth effect is long-term. It will not be reversed. So hormonal effect can be short-term or it can be long-lasting. The nervous control, on the other hand, is short-lived. You touch something hot, you move your hand back. Again, a short-lived control. The hormonal control can affect growth. Nervous control, on the other hand, cannot affect growth. The hormonal control can bring about specific chemical changes and regulate metabolism, like thyroxine hormone. It controls how fast the digestion is going on in your body. The respiratory rate is going on in your body. This will be done by thyroxine. The nervous control has no such influence. The hormonal control cannot be modified by learning, whereas the nervous control can be modified by learning. You can learn how to play a musical instrument. You can become a touch typist, but your body cannot learn how much hormone to be produced for particular function. So this is the primary difference between the hormonal control and the nervous control. Now, you need to know that there are two types of glands in the body, the endocrine and the exocrine gland. The endocrine glands are those glands which pour their secretions in blood. The blood will be flowing through the entire body, and ultimately the hormone will produce its effect on the target cell or organ. The exocrine glands, on the other hand, produce their secretions directly on the target cells. The secretions are not poured in the blood. They are poured only on the target cell. For example, the saliva, which is produced in the mouth, is produced by salivary glands which are present in the mouth itself. So they pour the secretions in the mouth, so that becomes an exocrine gland. An endocrine gland, on the other hand, will be producing the secretions in the blood. It will be circulating throughout the body and will affect only the target cells. The sweat glands, the tear glands, the digestive glands, they are all examples of exocrine glands which pour their secretion directly at the place or the site where the secretions are required. Now, what are hormones? because you've been starting with using the term hormone. Hormones are chemical messengers which are released directly in blood and act on target organs. Any hormone which has an influence in one species has a similar influence in other species. For example, insulin in us will help the body cells to change glucose to glycogen. It will have a similar influence in other species as well. Biologically, all hormones are very active in extremely small quantities. One single drop of a hormone can bring about a huge change. The hormones can be proteins, they can be amines, they can be steroids. Amine, for example, adrenaline is an amine. Protein, for example, insulin is a protein, it's a peptide. Steroid, for example, you have testosterone, estrogen, they are steroid hormones. Excess or deficiency of these hormones causes serious defects, and the hormones cannot be stored in the body. They have to be discharged out of the body. So the first hormonal gland which we are going to study is called as the adrenal or the suprarenal gland. It's called as the adrenal gland or suprarenal gland because it is present above the renal, that means the kidney structure. So if you were to see it in three-dimension rotating figure, you can understand that adrenal gland is present above the kidney like a cap. This adrenal gland is placed above both the kidneys, and since the kidneys are not aligned in position, the right kidney is slightly lower to accommodate the liver. So the adrenal gland is also placed slightly lower, but the location of these glands is above kidneys. Now the adrenal gland, if you were to cut it open, has two parts, adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. The cortex produces a certain set of hormones which are called as corticoids. Medulla, on the other hand, produces hormones called as adrenaline and noradrenaline. The adrenal gland is a very unique gland, especially the medulla part. The medulla part produces a hormone which prepares your body for emergency. The adrenal gland collectively is called as the 3F gland: fight, fright, and flight. It makes you fight in difficult situations. It makes you feel scared when you are frightened, and it will make you run away from a situation where you cannot fight, where some danger is posing a threat in front of you, which you cannot contradict. And this is all because of the hormone called adrenaline. The cortex part of adrenal gland produces glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, and sex corticoids. Sex corticoids are also called as adrenal androgens. The medulla part produces hormones called as adrenaline, noradrenaline. Adrenaline is also called as epinephrine. Collectively, both of them are called as catecholamines. So the adrenal or suprarenal gland pours its secretion in the blood and prepares your body basically for emergency. And what kind of an emergency can be there? When you are scared, when you're running an exam, when you have a maiden speech in front of a huge audience, when you're having an interview, when you're facing a competitive exam. All of these are emergency situations. It necessarily doesn't need, or you're facing a wild animal out in the open. So all of these situations would require your body to prepare itself for emergency reactions. So this is something the sympathetic nervous system of your body does. So the physical effects of adrenaline are your heartbeat will increase, your bladder will relax, you suddenly focus better, your senses become very acute. There are tremors which are produced in the muscles because your muscles get a rich supply of blood at that time. The face will become flushed, your body is ready for action. The mouth goes dry because the blood supply from the digestive system is withdrawn and given and distributed to the skeletal muscles. The digestion is not of primary importance at this time. So your digestion is temporarily reduced at this time. So these all will prepare your body for emergency. So once the emergency is over, adrenaline secretion will reduce and the body will slowly and slowly come back to its normal position. So adrenaline is called as the emergency hormone. Now next is what you're going to do is a defect associated with the cortisol, one hormone which is produced by the adrenal cortex. Now, adrenal cortex produces corticoids, as we did. One of them is called as cortisol. Excess or deficiency of cortisol causes defects. So here we are going to study the hyposecretion or undersecretion of cortisol. This causes a disease called as Addison's disease. In Addison's disease, you have these symptoms. There is nausea, you have a vomiting sensation, there is weight loss. You become sensitive to cold and pain, there is loss of energy, increased susceptibility to infections, there's a low blood glucose level, there's a changed skin pigmentation which occurs. So all of these are the defects produced in the symptoms produced in the hyposecretion of cortisol. If there is hypersecretion of cortisol, that also produces serious defects. The condition in this case is called as Cushing syndrome. Cushing syndrome is manifested by osteoporosis. The bones become extremely weak. They can fracture easily. There is salt and water retention in the body. The body gives a puffy appearance. There is high blood sugar level. Then there is obesity, excessive uncontrolled weight gain in a person. So all of these are due to hypersecretion of the cortisol, that is adrenal cortex hormone. Then there is a defect called as adrenal viralism. This is very noticeable in case of females. When there is an overgrowth of adrenal cortex in a mature woman, a woman who's already achieved the age of 18, after that, if there is an overgrowth of adrenal cortex, she will develop facial hair. She will develop a hoarse voice. This is called as adrenal viralism. Virile word means male, male characters. So due to adrenal cortex overgrowth, there is a virile character, maleness produced in a female. Therefore, the condition is called as adrenal viralism. So you can understand how even a small oversecretion or undersecretion of the hormones produces serious defects. The next gland which you are going to do is called as the pancreas. Now, pancreas is a gland which is unique. This gland I mentioned in the beginning. This is part endocrine and part exocrine. So pancreas has a special name for itself. It's called as a myxocrine gland. A myxocrine gland is a gland which has both endocrine as well as the exocrine function. Now, exocrine means it pours its secretion directly on the target cell. For example, in case of pancreas, the pancreatic acini, they produce pancreatic juice, which is required in digestion. This pancreatic juice is released in the small intestine during digestion. The endocrine part of pancreas is called as Eyelets of Langerhans. It produces 3 different hormones by 3 groups of cells. These cells are called as the alpha cells, the beta cells, and the delta cells. The alpha cells produce glucagon, the beta cells produce insulin, and the delta cells produce somatostatin. These 3 hormones are produced by single part of pancreas called as Eyelets of Langerhans. Now, if I show you the previous slide, you will be able to see that the Eyelets of Langerhans are labeled here, where they have labeled the alpha cells, the beta cells, and the delta cells. So the alpha, beta, and delta cells of Eyelets of Langerhans represent the endocrine part of pancreas, and the pancreatic acini, these represent the exocrine part. Therefore, pancreas is called as a myxocrine gland, part endocrine, part exocrine. Now, the main hormone produced by pancreas is called as insulin. Insulin is very important in maintaining the carbohydrate metabolism of the body. Insulin is released after we eat a meal. Insulin helps to change the surplus glucose by the cells into glycogen. When insulin is released, the body will use up glucose, respiratory rate will increase, and extra glucose will be stored in two places, either in the liver or in the muscles, in the skeletal muscles. So in both these places, the glucose is converted into glycogen and stored. But if there is an under secretion of insulin, it causes a condition which is called as diabetes mellitus or sugar diabetes. Mellitus word means honey. So when there is a release of sugar in the urine, it's called as diabetes mellitus. It's also called as hyperglycemia. That means extra glucose in the blood. So in case of diabetes mellitus, the body is unable to convert glucose into glycogen, and the surplus glucose is released in the urine. If, on the other hand, there's an over-secretion of insulin in a normal person, it will lead to nerve cell starvation. The nerve cells require oxygen, require glucose every second. Even a 5-second delay in oxygen or glucose supply will lead to death of the nervous tissue, and it cannot be recovered because our nervous tissue does not repair itself. Now, if there is an oversecretion, then the nerve cells will be starved. If this oversecretion occurs in a diabetic person, a person who's already suffering from diabetes mellitus, then such a person will go into an insulin shock or a brain coma, and it will cause hypoglycemia, reduced glucose in the blood, and ultimately, if unchecked, it leads to death. So oversecretion of insulin can be deadly. So you have understood that oversecretion or undersecretion of insulin can produce serious defects. Now, what are the symptoms of diabetes mellitus? There is excessive urination, especially at night, and the urine has glucose. There is raised blood glucose at all times. A person will always feel thirsty because you give out urine which is hypertonic, has a large amount of glucose. To compensate, the body will produce extra urine. That means a person will feel thirsty. You will always remain tired because there is no stored reserve of energy in the body. You will have excessive weight loss. So a person will start losing weight and it may be unexplained. A person will always feel hungry because there is no reserve of food. So whenever you are feeling the need to eat, your body converts the glycogen into glucose and releases it in the bloodstream. If a person does not have any stored glycogen, he or she will always feel hungry. Then there is a condition called blurry vision. You are unable to see things clearly because the deposition of glucose occurs in the cornea part of the eye. It may affect the retina, it may affect the cornea due to excessive glucose-laden blood flowing inside your body. Then wounds don't heal properly and wounds don't heal fast. If you have any injury in the body, then that injury may become inflamed. It can even lead to a gangrene. The entire organ may have to be removed. The entire foot may have to be amputated if the symptoms persist. So diabetes is one deadly disease. It's a #1 killer in most of the developed nations. Now, diabetes can be controlled by having a proper diet and a healthy lifestyle. But in the body, how is the insulin controlled? Insulin is controlled by the hormone called glucagon. These two hormones are antagonistic to each other. Okay, one hormone lowers the blood glucose level, another hormone raises the blood glucose level. So insulin lowers the blood glucose level and glucagon raises the blood glucose level. So what happens is after we have eaten a meal, the insulin secretion is increased. At that time, insulin will stimulate the body cells to use up glucose. Glucose will be used up by tissue cells, or it will be stored as glycogen. And ultimately, this will lower the blood glucose level. If we have not eaten a meal, supposingly we have not eaten, we are starving, fasting, or there is a gap between the meals, at that time, instead of insulin, the glucagon will be released. This glucagon will stimulate the glycogen to change into glucose, and this glucose will be released in the blood. So this will raise the blood sugar level. Now, if there is a low blood sugar, then this low blood sugar will promote release of glucagon. If there is a high blood sugar, this high blood sugar will promote the release of insulin. So your blood, the pancreas, the liver, the body cells themselves will be able to regulate the glucose metabolism by using the glucagon insulin cycle. The next hormonal gland which we are going to study is called as the thyroid gland. It is a butterfly-shaped gland present in front of the neck. This part here is your larynx. So just in front of your trachea, you have the butterfly-shaped gland called as the thyroid gland. This thyroid gland produces one main hormone in the body. That hormone is called as the thyroxine. Now, the thyroid gland is connected. There are two lobes in the thyroid gland. These are connected to each other by a narrow isthmus. This isthmus will bring these two glands, these two lobes of the thyroid gland together. The thyroid is a gland which functions with the secretion of a mineral called iodine. So iodine is required for proper functioning of the thyroid gland. Both hypersecretion and the hyposecretion, that means extra secretion and less secretion of thyroid gland, that is thyroxine, produces serious defects. So under secretion of thyroxine, it is called as hypothyroidism or hyposecretion of thyroxine. This produces, number one, the simple goiter. Now I told you iodine mineral is required for the proper functioning of thyroid gland. If iodine is less in diet, as in hilly areas, then the thyroid gland enlarges. So that it can absorb whatever trace quantity of iodine is there in the blood. And in doing so, it causes a disease called simple goiter. This is simply avoided by having adequate amount of iodine in the diet. So this is how enlargement of the thyroid gland takes place. The thyroid gland basically enlarges due to deficiency of iodine in the diet. If iodine is an adequate amount, the thyroid gland keeps on functioning in a normal rate. The next defect is called as creatinism. Now, this is due to undersecretion of thyroxine in children. This generally occurs when the children are not born and the mother is taking a diet which is having deficiency of iodine, or the children in the first few years of their growth, especially the newborn babies, they are not fed adequate amount of iodine, or their the thyroid gland does not develop properly, due to which the secretion of thyroxine is not proper. In such cases, they will have a moon face, they will be mentally retarded. This defect is called as cretinism. The third is the high undersecretion or hyposecretion of thyroxine in adults. It's called myxedema. In myxedema, there is puffiness produced around the eyes. There is salt and water retention, due to which a person will display edema, that is swelling of hands and feet. A person will become sluggish because thyroxine controls the basal metabolic rate. If somebody is not able to produce adequate thyroxine, the basal metabolic rate will become low. So these people feel lethargic, tired, their body temperature is generally low, and they have swelling in hands, face, eyes, legs, etc. Then we have the oversecretion of thyroxine. This is called as hyperthyroidism or hypersecretion of thyroxine. So the condition in this case is called as exophthalmic goiter. Now, ophthalmic word means it's associated with eye. There is a goiter in the neck. Because of this goiter, because of this swelling or increase or inflammation of the thyroid gland, there is excessive production of thyroxine. But here what happens is the body temperature, the metabolic rate goes so high that a person will have extremely lean features. There will be virtually no fat in the body. All fat will be used up because of excessively high respiratory rates, high basal metabolic rates, and so much so that the fat layer around eye is also respired upon. It's very limited, due to which it looks as if a person is staring at you. Okay, this is therefore called as exophthalmic goiter. This is due to hypersecretion of thyroxine. So by now you must have understood both hyposecretion of any hormonal gland or its hypersecretion produces serious defects. The next gland which you are going to do is called as the most important gland in the body. It's the master endocrine gland. This gland is present at the base of the skull. It is hanging from the hypothalamus by a small stalk. The hypothalamus controls the functioning of pituitary gland. The pituitary controls the functioning of all other endocrine glands. The pituitary is called as the master endocrine glands. It has got three lobes. The anterior lobe, it is also called as adenohypophysis. The posterior lobe or the neurohypophysis, and the intermediate lobe or the pars intermedia. Now, why is this called as neurohypophysis or adenohypophysis? The word hypophysis is because it is hanging from a hypophyseal stalk from the hypothalamus. Pituitary is a pea-shaped gland. It hangs from the hypothalamus by a small stalk. That stalk is called as the hypophyseal stalk. Now, neurohypophysis is part nervous and part endocrine. So this is one part of the endocrine system, which is part nervous and part endocrine. Therefore, neuro. And the anterior part is called as adeno. So this is an adenohypophysis, neurohypophysis, and the middle lobe is called as the intermediate lobe. The intermediate lobe is not very important in humans, but in case of very lower primates, it produces certain hormones which enables them to change their skin pigmentation during winters and summers so that they can blend with the environment better. They can change the color of their fur from white to brown or brown to white, depending upon the external environment. Now, there are these three parts of the pituitary gland. Anterior pituitary, it's also called as adenohypophysis. Posterior pituitary, which is called as the neurohypophysis, the intermediate lobe or pars intermedia. So the anterior pituitary produces certain set of hormones which are called as the tropic hormones. Tropic hormones are called so because they regulate the functioning of other endocrine glands. The hormones produced are growth hormone. It is also called as somatotropin. Gonadotrophic hormone, GTH, or gonad stimulating hormone. This hormone further includes these three hormones: the luteinizing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, and prolactin. These three hormones regulate the functioning of the reproductive system. Then it produces ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. This regulates the functioning of adrenal cortex. And finally, it produces the hormone called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which controls the functioning of the thyroid gland. So these are the hormones produced by anterior pituitary. Now, the posterior pituitary or the neurohypophysis basically produces two hormones, ADH or vasopressin and oxytocin. So the hormones produced by anterior pituitary are growth hormone, GH, or somatotropin, thyroid stimulating hormone, the gonad stimulating hormone, GSH, or gonadotrophic hormone, GTH. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and collectively they're all called as tropic hormones because they stimulate other endocrine glands to produce their own specific hormones. Now we have the defects due to the growth hormone. The growth hormone is released after the birth of a child and its secretion stops the moment you become an adult. If the secretion of growth hormone stops in a child, then the child's height will not grow. The organs may grow reproductively, the other parts of the body may grow, but the overall growth stops. This defect is called as dwarfism. So this is due to undersecretion or hyposecretion of growth hormone. If there is hypersecretion of growth hormone, it causes two defects. That means excessive secretion of growth hormone causes two defects. Number one is called as gigantism, and number two is called as acromegaly. Gigantism is when there is an oversecretion of growth hormone in a child. A child should have the secretion of growth hormone stop or reduce with advancing age, and it should completely stop the moment you become an adult. But if the secretion continues, then a person will become a pituitary giant. And if the secretion of growth hormone starts in an adult, the adult will display the condition which is called as acromegaly. So we will see both of these separately now. Now, gigantism is a defect which occurs when a child has an oversecretion of growth hormone. He or she will show a abnormal increase in height. Now, this here you are seeing one person called Robert Wadlow. He was the tallest man in the world, 8 feet 11.1 inches, and she is Sandy Allen with a height of 7 feet 7 inches. So these are examples of giants, pituitary giants, because of oversecretion of growth hormone in a child. So we have dwarfism and gigantism, both defects in a child when there's undersecretion of growth hormone in a child or oversecretion of growth hormone in a child. Both of these will be caused in childhood. On the other hand, acromegaly is caused in an adult. So here you are seeing the man called Maurice Tillet. He was a Russian boxer. He's also called as the French angel. If you people have seen the movie called Shrek, so in Shrek, he is the main character. His name is Shrek. It's an animation movie for the children. And in this, Shrek is based on this man. He is Maurice Tillet. So in case of Maurice Tillet, he displayed the condition called acromegaly. And what is acromegaly basically? The overgrowth cannot occur in an adult. You have already attained your adult size. But if oversecretion of growth hormone results, then this lower jaw, the mandible, this protrudes, this becomes bigger. The hands and the feet, they enlarge. So this is called as acromegaly. Now the hormones produced by posterior pituitary are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. So oxytocin helps in during childbirth, and vasopressin is a hormone which regulates the urine output by controlling the reabsorption of water from the outgoing urine. Now, if there is a deficiency of vasopressin, that is antidiuretic hormone, it causes the second kind of diabetes, which is called as diabetes insipidus. It is also called as water diabetes. Like diabetes mellitus is called as sugar diabetes, diabetes insipidus is called as water diabetes. In this, there is excessive thirst and excessive urination. A person will have too much of urine production, and because he or she produces too much of urine, there is excessive thirst to make up for that, to compensate for the loss of water in urine. Okay, the last topic which we need to cover is called as the feedback mechanism. What is a feedback mechanism? It basically is when the end product of a reaction determines the rate of a reaction. So it's a biological process, a signal or a mechanism that tends to initiate, that means accelerate, or inhibit, that is slow down a process. A feedback mechanism will decide whether the mechanism rate should increase or whether the speed of reaction should decrease. So the feedback mechanism can be of two types, positive and negative. A positive feedback is that which accelerates a reaction, and a negative feedback is that which retards a reaction or slows down a reaction. So positive feedback mechanism can be seen in case of childbirth. When a baby has to be born, the uterine muscles start to contract. So the uterine muscles need to contract even further. The opening of the uterus, which is called as the cervix, this is stretched. The baby needs to be sent out of the body, pushed out of the body. So at this time, the nervous impulse is sent to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus sends the impulse to the posterior pituitary, which produces the hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin will travel to the uterine muscles and increase the contractions. The contractions will become more vigorous. So contractions had started. Now the contractions are becoming more vigorous. So once the baby is propelled out, that means the childbirth has taken place. Again, the cervix will come back to its normal position. The uterus will come back to its normal position. And this positive feedback cycle will be broken. No oxytocin will be released by posterior pituitary because the process of childbirth is over. This is called as positive feedback mechanism, where the end product will determine if you need more contractions, so produce more oxytocin, more contractions. So once that cycle is, the purpose is achieved, the cycle will be broken. This is positive feedback mechanism. Then there is the negative feedback mechanism. A negative feedback mechanism is something which you people studied for insulin and glucagon also. You can study it for thyroid also. Now, the thyroid gland is stimulated by the anterior pituitary. There is a hormone called as thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, I told you pituitary is controlled by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus produces hormones which are called as releasing hormones. So thyroid releasing hormone, TRH, will be produced by the hypothalamus. It will tell the anterior pituitary to produce thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine. Now, once thyroxine has achieved its effect, the thyroxine will no longer be required. So it will have an inhibitory effect. The thyroxine secretion is already there. Reduce the production of TSH, reduce the production of TRH. So thyroxine secretion will tell these two to reduce their own secretion. When there is extra production of thyroxine, the initial step which caused the production of thyroxine will stop. This is negative feedback mechanism. You have eaten, you are no longer hungry, so stop eating. This is negative feedback mechanism. Okay. So the thyroid system can be studied better. The hypothalamus produces the releasing hormone. This stimulates the thyroid gland to produce the thyroid stimulating hormone, which will increase the production of thyroxine and increase metabolism. Once the metabolism has increased, it will tell TSH also to stop producing more stimulating thyroid gland. It will tell TRH to stop stimulating the pituitary gland. So in other words, once the end product has been achieved, it will tell the initial steps to stop occurring because the final purpose has been achieved. So when the final product has an inhibitory effect, it is called as negative feedback mechanism. But when the final product has an stimulatory effect, then that is called as a positive feedback mechanism. So with this, we finish off this chapter of endocrine system. Hopefully, you would have understood it all. So, wish you all the very best. Thank you very much. God bless you all.